Hiya, pals! Welcome to the Mouse Bytes podcast! Here we go!
Hello and welcome to Mouse Bytes, the show all about Disney video games, past and present. I'm your host, Clay, and usually I'm joined by my co-host, Jeff. Unfortunately, today I am not. Basically, guys, what's going on is I figured I was going to give this whole podcasting thing a shot all by myself. No, really what's happening is basically the beginning of July, I am moving from where I live now to a different state, and so it's going to get really crazy for a couple weeks, maybe even longer. And so I'm recording these way ahead of time. I'm trying to make sure that there is not a big gap where you guys aren't getting your Mouse Bytes episodes. And so rather than force Jeff to record like double the amount of episodes, I figured that I would maybe try to tackle a couple episodes on my own. They won't be as long. I'm shooting for maybe 30 minutes. Fingers crossed on that. But really what this is more of like my first impressions with the game. Obviously without Jeff here to converse with about these things, it's really just my opinion, and I want to still leave these games that I may or may not cover by myself open for me and Jeff to come back to down the road and take a look at together. So yeah, this is just going to be me, and hopefully it's entertaining. Hopefully you enjoy it, but I'm going to try to keep it upbeat and keep things moving along. So that being said, that's about it. All I've got for starting off the show here. We got a good episode today. Hopefully you'll like it. This is an interesting game. It'll be fun to talk about. So guys, today we are taking a look at Beauty and the Beast for the NES. Awesome. So starting off, we are going to hit, I keep saying we, it's just me. I'm going to give a couple brief little information about this game. So to start off, in case you're not familiar with what game I'm talking about, what the heck is this game? Now, Beauty and the Beast for the NES is pretty straightforward as far as just the overall concept of the game. It really is more or less a platformer with some action in it, where you play as Beast and you're running around punching things and jumping gaps and platforming a little bit. Pretty straightforward. It's easy to confuse with another game because this was only one version that came out of this game, but we'll talk about that in a second. So this game was developed by Probe Entertainment. I looked at a list of different games they had made. They've got quite a few. Especially in the older days. I don't think they're around anymore. It looks like maybe N64 PlayStation era was kind of perhaps it for them. They did have some Super NES games. They had a smaller library of NES games, but they worked on Game Boy games, Game Gear. There's all kinds of stuff. But really, Beauty and the Beast seems to be the only Disney one that's sticking out, that's really jumping out at me right now. There's some Batman on here and some Acme, like Bugs Bunny stuff on here. So, but yeah, so I don't know a whole lot about them, but I do know that they made this game. As I mentioned earlier, this game did release on the NES. It was released in the year of 1994 in Europe. Could not find a specific month or even a date. We just know it released in 1994. Now, the interesting thing about this game, and the reason you may not even have heard of this, if you are from the United States or even, I guess, Japan, Not that we probably have Japanese listeners, but you never know. This game only released in Europe, and so that is the unique thing about this game. For whatever reason, only released there. Now, this game did release alongside the same game, but on the Super Nintendo. So this was kind of one of those where they made it for two different consoles at the same time. Now, I've played a little bit of the SNES one, and I've watched enough on it and researched enough now online to know that they are pretty much the same game, but obviously making that jump as big a jump as that is, there are some differences one way or another. There's a lot more information online about the SNES version than the NES. Not as much, and that probably has to do a lot with the fact that it never came to the States. But regardless, I'm sure at some point we'll take a look at the SNES version, but I figured it was just more interesting to take a look at the NES one because, frankly, there just isn't anything out there about it. So I figured, what the heck? Let's take a look at the maybe lesser known version. But the SNES version was developed by the same company, Probe Entertainment. It was published by Hudson Soft. I believe the NES one was too. The SNES version came out in North America on July 1st, 1994, and then Europe on February 23rd, 1995. So my guess is Europe got the NES version in 94 when America got the SNES version, and then a year later they put out the SNES version in Europe, which is kind of weird, but I guess they wanted to give the NES version a shot first. Anyway, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time comparing the two. I might mention the SNES version down the road. Like I said, I haven't played enough of the SNES one to compare it against the NES one, but from what I hear, it's a lot harder. Definitely visually better, but this game is already kind of hard, so I don't know if I'm super excited to go check that game out anytime soon. But regardless, it is what it is. As far as history with the game, as I mentioned, I've never played this before. When I was kind of scrolling through NES games trying to look into reviewing a game, this one popped out, and I just remember thinking, I've literally never heard anything about this, and I thought it was kind of weird, and then I realized, oh, Europe only, that's why. So, yeah, reviewing it or playing it in preparation for this episode is the first time I've played it, so everything here is my more or less my initial impressions, just because I haven't spent a ton of time with it. This is kind of my first time, so that gives you an idea of where I'm coming from with this. With that, we are going to go ahead and jump into today's gameplay discussion. All right, so to start off, we're going to be talking, as in I, am going to be talking about the visuals of this game. First visuals, then audio, and then we'll move through there. Let's see. So visually, there's some interesting things we need to talk about here. So right off the bat, first thing you're going to see, there's an opening cutscene at the very beginning of the game, where it kind of gives you the backstory of the game or of the movie, however you want to look at it. And it's all done through stained glass, very similar to how the movie does it. And yeah, that's a very unique way of doing it without needing to have super good art, which I'll get to it at the end, but basically it backfires at the very end because they don't use stained glass on the last part at the very end after you beat the game, and it looks awful. So at the start, you got some scrolling text underneath the stained glass, and it works really well. So no problems there. That they worked well with what they had. Immediately after that, you're thrown into the game, and first thing you see is Beast. Obviously, that's your character. And so let's talk about his sprite real quick. Honestly, it's not terrible. It looks like Beast. He's got his little purple pants and his purple cape on. You can see his fangs and his face. Like, for kind of an odd character visually, I guess, it works. It's not too bad. And so don't have a lot of issues with him. He's so big, though, it kind of creates some difficulty with his hitbox, but that really doesn't have anything to do with the design. So from that standpoint, it works well. Level-wise, the game has a decent amount of variety to it, to the point that it isn't overly distracting or too repetitive. It starts out maybe a little repetitive the first couple levels. You get a lot of the same stuff, but eventually the game kind of falls into its own and it does a lot better. Throughout the game, you do come across a couple of your buddies. I call them buddies, but really they're his servants. Lumiere, you meet in level 1, and he's this cute little sprite of him, jumping around. And he's just super cute. Looks really good. So some of that, and then I think Mrs. Potts shows up later, and she looks fine too. So I really like those. That was a nice touch. Level design wise, as far as like the visuals of it, they tried their best to make it feel as dark as possible, and I feel like the SNES did a little bit better job with it. But for what they had to work with, they tried to make like the backgrounds dark and to give them depth. As you're going, around these dungeons or through the castle, they have decent backgrounds to try to kind of make it seem dark and mysterious and giant and all that. So can't really fault them on that. I think they did a decent job. Once you get outside the castle, it gets a little more weird. Specifically, the sky in one of the levels is just completely bright red. And so it's just like this blood red sky, and just really feels out of place and kind of odd. So there's little things like that throughout where it's a little off-putting, I guess. And then there's 2 other character designs that are just not good at all, really rough. And I'm going to save those for later once we kind of talk through the levels, and I'll explain about them because it's just better to wait. Lastly, one thing I want to mention, like with a lot of these games, is the developers feel the need to show us all of this information of things that we need to know, like scores. For some reason, they felt the need to have a score system in this game. So that, along with your health and your time limit, are all displayed at the bottom of the screen. Now, rather than putting them over top of the gameplay, they did the old, we're going to put a bar at the bottom. And so it's this big black bar, which I guess it's black, so it's less distracting, but it just takes up a lot of screen space. Presents how many lives you have, how many hits remaining that you can take, represented by flowers. And then you also have the rows that represents how much time you have left in each level. And so I like the rows thing. It's a good representation of, brings it from the game and everything. But that being along with the hit marker also being roses, it's too much flower going on. So a little confusing, but whatever. Moving on, next is audio. The music in this game is actually pretty good, especially the opening track, The Tale as Old as Time, Beauty and the Beast song that you heard at the very beginning of the episode. Really good. They obviously lifted that straight from the movie. The majority of the rest of the music in the game is original as far as I can tell. But so that original, or the non-original one at the beginning, was really well done. And then the remainder of the levels are actually pretty good music-wise. Perhaps some of it doesn't necessarily fit the style of the movie, perhaps. Maybe it's a little too intense or a little over the top. But regardless, it's still really good. And for the NES, I think they did a pretty good job. It never got annoying or grating, and I felt like it kind of kept the intensiveness alive, if that's even a word. So yeah, I don't know. The little bit that I read online about this game, a lot of people seem to think that maybe not the best game, gameplay wise, but almost everybody that I saw leaving comments about it just talked super highly of the music. I guess the guy who did the music for this game is pretty well known. I don't have his name here in front of me, but it seems like he's got a pretty good following as far as chiptunes go. So yeah, so 2 thumbs up for me on the music. Probably one of the stronger parts of the game, if you ask me. Following up from the music is the gameplay and difficulty. Now, I will say, as this was my first time playing through, I struggled with this game a little bit. There is some difficulty to it, as with most, 8-bit platformers back in the day. It's challenging, and I'll get a little more into that. But basically, as far as the overall goal and gameplay, as I mentioned earlier, the goal is to proceed through each level and just reach a door at the end that leads to the next part. And so it sounds simple, but unfortunately, it's not always that easy. So it's just something that it feels like it should be more linear, and sometimes it's not. And I'll get on that in a minute, but. Following that is the story of the game. Now, as far as I can tell, the game really just follows the movie. Pretty straightforward. They have small cutscenes in between each level where they continue that stained glass, like I mentioned earlier. And even though each level isn't necessarily like, oh, I remember this from the movie, as far as the story parts that they interject into it, it is all supposed to be happening during the movie. Some levels reference the movie better than others, and I understand that sometimes you just kind of have to take liberties. Everything works well. The ending isn't maybe as flushed out, but we'll get there. So real quickly, I'm just going to kind of fly through these levels. Not going to go super in depth, just hit on a couple small things that I noticed and took note of, perhaps just to kind of paint a picture of what these levels look like. Basically, there are 4 levels with different parts to them. So I don't know if you would consider those parts to be levels and not parts. I'm not sure. But regardless, I'm just going to kind of fly through these real quick. Some of them have like 4 parts, some have 2. It's really random how they work. But you start off in the castle. It's also kind of a dungeon, I guess. And it's pretty straightforward. Eventually, you make your way all the way to the right and down, and then you find Lumiere, like I mentioned earlier. And it's a pretty cool little, I don't know what you call it. It's a cool little thing where you basically Lumiere follows you, or you follow him, I guess, and you mechanic. It's a cool mechanic. That's what I was trying to say. You follow him, and if you don't stay close to him, it gets really dark and you can't see. And so you have to rely on your buddy to help you make it through the level. And I thought that was really neat. I wish that they had kept that type of mechanic for more of the levels where you rely on your buddies or your servants to help you get to the end. But unfortunately, it's not something that's widely used outside of this and one of the bosses, as far as I can remember. After that, you get to part 2, where you're in more of the castle with lots of stairs that you must go up and down. They also introduce these fire-breathing statues that are really annoying. There's these falling statues that fall down staircases that you have to attempt to jump over, which never worked well for me. And then there's these like dog gargoyle monster things that you have to either fight or jump over. And if they get a hold of you, they just clench onto you, and I mash on the buttons, and they just take all your health away and you die. And I've gotten out of their grasp sometimes, and sometimes I cannot. And I'll go from having full health to no health in one attack. It's so dumb. Those really upset me and like made me so mad. But I forgot to mention in the gameplay, Beast does have the option to punch. That is his one attack that he can do, and it's more of like an uppercut. And then also, if you hold down the select button, he has a roar that has to charge up. And if you do that, it stuns all enemies around you. If you stun bats, you can use them as platforms, which is kind of a cool idea. But if it's not something you're actually thinking about, it's it's not something you would think about. So that is part 2. Part 3, you climb on, like, it's just more castle, and there's these giant, like, drapery, I guess you would call them. I'm not sure. And you have to climb on them. Earlier on, you realize pretty quickly that you can climb on walls, which is a cool mechanic. Kind of has a Ninja Gaiden feel to it. But The climbing in this one, sometimes you use it and a lot of times you don't. But climbing on the drapery was something I didn't realize was an option, and it took me quite a while to figure it out. So that was a little frustrating. Also in this level, you come across these evil candles that try to burn you, and they're not Lumiere, so I guess there are some candles in the castle that are evil. I don't know. Finally, part 4 of level 1 is the boss, and this boss looks a lot like Beast, which is weird, but he's like a set of armor with a spear, and he's pretty lame. Basically, you have to go to the end of the area where the boss is, where Mrs. Potts is standing or sitting. I can't tell what she's doing. And she gives you tea that I think it's tea that you throw or shoot or something onto this boss. And you just keep doing that over and over, and he just keeps walking at you with the spear. And you jump over him, and every like 2 or 3 times you throw the tea, you have to go back to Mrs. Potts and get more. Very lackluster, very underwhelming. So, level 2, we finally get outside of the castle, and we're in the snow. And this is where I mentioned you run into the blood sky that is super duper red and really off-putting. You make your way through the outside, it's snowy and all that, and then you hit this bridge that when you stand on it, it crumbles. And so instinctively you go, oh, I better get out of the way. And but really the game wants you to fall through to move on through the level. And that's something about up till like right now that really frustrated me about this game is it's not very linear, which is whatever. I mean, I prefer these old 8-bits to be real left or right. I enjoy them that way. But if they're not going to be, it needs to be a little more intuitive, because a lot of times you feel like you're jumping over pits, but really what you're doing is you're jumping over areas that you need to go down into to proceed through the game. And so it's just so much trial and error, and you go really far and you feel like you're going the right way, and then all of a sudden you hit a dead end and you're like, well, where am I supposed to go? And so half of this game is just knowing where to go. I feel like you'd have such an easier time with it. But that all kind of changes here, moving on through the next levels. That kind of isn't as much of an issue. So after falling off the bridge, you go down into a cave. There's some geysers and spikes and lots of platformers. Really kind of a bland level. Not a whole lot going on. Really your typical cave level, I guess you could say. Finally, you hit part 2 of the level. You go back outside, and there's these waterfalls with moving water. And you are platforming your way up to the top. And so this is kind of... this is where it starts to feel a little bit more linear, where it's pretty clear where you have to go. One thing I noticed about this level is there are these really long gaps, either, to left or right or up and down. And looking at them, by now you know how high or far you can jump, and they just don't look like you could make those jumps. But you can, and you'll literally jump for a platform from below it, and you can see that Beast's feet are not going to reach that platform. But something in the game just kind of gives it that extra little inch or a couple extra pixels to push it to where you actually land on the platform. It's really weird. And you look at these gaps that you have to jump across, and you're like, I can't make that. But if you jump right enough, you make it. So it's just, I don't know. It just didn't feel like a lot of the jumps I was making like I was supposed to be going that way, but that's really what the game wanted you to do. So just kind of strange. Finally, part 3, you get back up and you're in the snow again with the red sky. And then you literally move left or right through the rest of this level. And then finally you get to the end of the level where there's, I guess you would consider it a boss. It's one wolf that you fight, and I assume it's to save Belle. And thus ends part 3 of level 2. So then we hit into level 3, which this is probably the most bizarre part of the game. And I want to say this is kind of infamous. I've heard people mention it online and kind of make fun of this part. But I kid you not, this whole level 3 is a snowball toss between Beast and Belle. Now, you all remember the part in the movie where Beast and Belle are out in the snow and they throw snowballs at each other. They have a little snowball fight or whatever. But in this, it's like an egg toss or something where she throws it and you catch it. And so she basically chucks these up in the air at different angles and speeds, and as you, the beast, you must catch them by just moving beast to where it's going to land, and then it kind of automatically catches it. Now, the biggest issue with this, besides it's just the fact that it's really weird and kind of just feels out of place, is that the sprite work on Belle is just awful. You'll have to look at the footage. Actually, I don't even know if I got the footage on this part. You'll have to look it up because it's just so bad. It really doesn't look like Belle. It's like this weird, like Jawa looking. It's so hard to explain, but I remember looking at it when I was first watching some gameplay, and I was like, that looks strange. And then I literally heard someone make mention of it and like made fun of it, and I was like, okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one who thought that. But check it out. It's really awful, and it kind of ruins the whole thing. So it's just a really long thing. Like, it would have been okay if it was maybe 30 seconds to a minute long, but it just drags on and on. So I won't let this drag on and on. Finally, level 4, the final levels. I guess there's like 3 of them. You start off in the library. I assume it's Belle's library that's been gifted to her, in which Beast, for some reason, needs to navigate through and fight off these evil books that are attacking him. This level, we finally kind of go back to the level design in the earlier levels where it's not as linear and you're not really sure where you're supposed to go. And so, it's just kind of a little nonsensical if you ask me. Once you get to the top, there's a flying gargoyle goblin kind of guy that crashes through the glass and flies around. You have to fight him. That was kind of cool. I liked him coming. You could see his shadow on the other side of the glass, and he kind of crashed through. It's kind of a neat concept. Part 2, you get to the top of the castle where there's lightning, which looks pretty good. And then you're fighting all kinds of evil gargoyles and things. This game is just full of like goblins and gargoyles and bats and things. Finally, part 3, final boss is Gaston. Now, before you can get to Gaston, you have to fight LeFou. And at least I think it's LeFou because the sprite work on this one, once again, is just super off-putting and really poorly done. And I get you only got so much to work with the NES, but man, these look rough. Look them up. LeFou looks like a little child with like a really big toothy grin. And he just runs around and tries to shoot you, and you either avoid him, or I can't remember if you can hit him or not. So that part's really weird, but I guess logically it could make sense, even though in the movie LeFou was down below. Anyway, so as you make your way up, finally you do come face to face with Gaston, and basically he chases you to the top of the castle, which feels like forever. It's like the tallest castle in the world. And as you're getting chased up, he shoots his bow and arrow at you, and you can kind of punch him as you go along. Finally, you get to the top, and you kind of put Gaston between you, and you put him between you and the edge of the castle. And so you punch and punch and punch, and eventually he falls off the side. Now, that is the end of the game, and what follows is nothing but disappointing. So immediately following him falling off the side, there is no cutscene and there's no stained glass, like I mentioned. All you get is a image and some text underneath of it. And the image is pulled directly from the movie, or at least traced over, with pixels or whatever. But basically, it's a picture of Beast in human form, kind of embracing the human versions of Cogsworth and Lumiere and stuff. And so it looks really familiar when you look at it. You're like, oh, I remember that part of the movie. But then, oddly enough, they like inserted Belle into the background, kind of over human Beast's shoulder, and she looks totally out of place. I mean, the whole thing already doesn't look super great, but she looks super added in, and like she really is behind his shoulder, and so it just kind of feels way out of place. It's like, oh yeah, me too, I'm Belle. It's like they should be the main focus, but for some reason they picked, Mrs. Potts and Lumiere and stuff, and him holding them, and so that it just doesn't look good. And then underneath it has text that reads, "Congratulations, you have found true love and won the heart of Belle," which once again, that line has nothing to do with what you're seeing on the graphic of Belle like peeking over in the background while all the buddies are hanging out. It's just really weird, and that is literally all you get at the end of the game. No cutscene, no credits. It's just over. That's what you get, and then it's done. And I get that that was kind of a thing for the NES back in the day, where endings were a bit lackluster at times, but this one to me feels like one of those cheap, like homebrew, like knockoff games that people make. They're like, oh, Lion King 3 for the Sega Genesis, and some person in China made it. And usually with those, the endings are really like lackluster, and it's just like, you win and it's over, or end, and you just see a picture. And this is what that feels like. This, like, the end of this game does not feel like an actual put together licensed game. So very lackluster, unfortunately, and just not a great way to end the game. So to give my final thoughts here, unfortunately, I've been pretty hard on this game, and I hate to say it, but I feel like it deserves it. It really isn't a great game. And there's one thing I didn't even really hit on, is the physics and the controls of Beast is really sluggish and sloppy. It's so slow and delayed. Jumps and punches feel not timed well with the button that I'm pushing. It takes forever to turn him around and get him to jump. It's just, it feels so sluggish and like it's fighting against the player the whole time. And so unfortunately, I just didn't have a lot of fun with it. The first level, I was like, okay, I could possibly see this, being, it kind of felt like a Capcom Disney game, like, all right. But then the non-linear side of it and trying to figure out where to go got so frustrating, on top of the arguably poor enemy design. It just eventually got so frustrating to me. Some of the sprites are rough, but could be overlooked, I guess. Music's good. So there is some redeeming qualities, but really overall, I would not recommend this game. I would say go check out the SNES version, even though I haven't really played that one, and I've heard it's even more difficult. But it does look better, and probably would just be a better experience overall. I don't know. I just yet to find a good Beauty and the Beast game. I have another one in my basement that is for the Genesis that has to do with Beast. I've yet to find one where I feel like, I just don't know if Beast is a good playable character. He just seems awkward and big, and hitboxes are strange. So I don't know. I'm not convinced there is a good Beauty and the Beast game out there. But hey, if there is, let me know. So sorry to be so negative, guys. I feel like we don't do that too terribly often on here. Usually I try to find the positives in a game, but this one I was struggling. So Jeff, if you're listening to this, this might be your lucky day not having to play this one. So I wouldn't be hurt if we didn't end up circling back around to this one in the future. But I would be interested to check out the SNES version. So, guys, that's it for this episode. Like I said, this has been a shorter one, but I appreciate you sticking it out, staying with me. Thanks so much for joining us. If you could, please give us a follow on Twitter. We are at mouse_bytes. Follow us there. We post all of our newest episodes when they are, the second they are live, we put them there. Also, you can go to www.thenintendovillage.com. From there, you can find links to all of our episodes, as well as other great shows, reviews, and other content. Our episodes are also on the Nintendo Village YouTube, so if you'd like to watch the gameplay footage as we talk about the games, you can check those out as well. Guys, thanks again, and join us next episode on Mouse Bytes. See ya!
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to subscribe, check out some of our other videos, and visit thenintendovillage.com, your home for everything Nintendo.